She really called him, knowing he had exposed her mom.
Get out. Not later. Not after dessert. Not when the kid isn't watching. Now. The words landed right in the middle of Christmas dinner, and for a second, nobody at the Wilson table moved. The forks stopped. The low holiday music from the kitchen suddenly felt too soft, too fake. Even the lights on the tree in the corner looked wrong, warm, and blinking over a moment, so cold it made Elena Wilson feel like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She was 26 years old, a single mother, and she had spent her whole life learning how to survive humiliation without letting it show on her face. But this was different, because her 7-year-old daughter was sitting right beside her. Maya's small hand slid into hers under the table, tight and trembling. "Mommy, did Grandma mean us?" That question hurt more than the words themselves. Across from them, Diane Wilson, 54, immaculate, controlled, still holding her wine glass like she hadn't just detonated the whole room, didn't soften, didn't hesitate, didn't look embarrassed. If anything, she looked relieved. "You and your child are not welcome here," she repeated, this time slower, making sure everyone heard every word. And they did hear it. Elena's older brother Marcus looked down at his plate. Her father said nothing. Aunt Lila blinked like she wanted to disappear. No one stepped in. No one said, "Diane, that's enough." No one said, "There's a child here." That silence told Elena everything. This wasn't a slip. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even family drama. It was planned. You ever realize in one single moment that you walked straight into a trap because you wanted to believe things had changed? Elena did. But instead of arguing, instead of crying, instead of giving her mother the public breakdown she was clearly expecting, Elena squeezed Maya's hand, stood up calmly, and said one word, "Okay." Then she reached for her coat and her phone. She dialed a number from memory. No explanation, no warning. 3 minutes later, the doorbell rang. And the second Diane Wilson saw who was standing on the other side of that door, her face changed. What kind of mother invites you to Christmas just to throw you out? That question didn't start at the table it had been building for years. Elena knew her place in the Wilson family long before that night. The disappointment, the lesson, the example Diane used in quiet conversations with relatives. Don't end up like her. It started when Elena was 19, pregnant, scared, alone. "I'm not raising your mistake," Diane had said back then, standing in the same kitchen now, filled with holiday decorations. "If you keep that child, you're on your own." And Elena had chosen to keep Maya. So she left. No safety net, no financial help. Just 2 jobs, a tiny apartment, and a baby who depended on her for everything. And somehow, without anyone from the Wilson family stepping in, she made it work. Years passed like that. No holidays together, no birthdays acknowledged, just distance. Until 6 months ago. That's when Diane called. Out of nowhere, "I think it's time we fix things," she'd said, her tone soft, almost unfamiliar. "Maya deserves to know her family." And that word "deserves" stuck with Elena, because Maya had started asking questions. Why don't we visit Grandma? Do I have cousins? Did I do something wrong? So Elena agreed, carefully, cautiously, and at first it seemed real. Diane smiled more, invited them over, bought Maya gifts, even hugged Elena once, awkward, brief, but enough to plant doubt. Maybe people change. Maybe time softens things. Maybe this was a second chance, but there were cracks, small ones. The kind you only notice if you're already expecting something to break. Comments disguised as concern. "You're still renting? That neighborhood isn't the safest. It must be exhausting doing everything alone." Each one's subtle, each one's sharp. And tonight, Christmas dinner, it felt like the culmination of all that effort. The house was perfect, the table was full, Maya was smiling. It almost worked. until Diane set down her glass and ended it. You don't belong here anymore. Not we need to talk. Not this isn't working. Just removal. Public. Final. And in that moment, Elena understood something clearly. This invitation had never been about fixing the past. It had been about controlling the narrative. One last time. But Diane had miscalculated one thing. Elena didn't come unprepared. And the person she just called, he wasn't just someone who would defend her. He was someone who could dismantle everything Diane had built. The doorbell didn't just ring it, cut through the room like a warning. Sharp, precise, impossible to ignore. And suddenly, the balance shifted. Elena didn't move, not a step. Her hand stayed on Maya's shoulder, steady, grounding, but her eyes locked on her mother, waiting. Diane forced a laugh, too quick, too tight. Did you invite someone? She asked, though her voice had already started to thin. Elena didn't answer. Marcus pushed his chair back slightly. Elena, seriously, what is this? Still nothing. Just silence. And then the door opened. Cold air rushed in first, curling around the edges of the room, slipping under sleeves and collars. And right behind it, him, Daniel Carter, 34, tall, composed, dressed like someone who didn't rush for anyone or anything. But it wasn't his presence alone that froze the room. It was recognition. Diane's face changed instantly. Not confusion, not curiosity, recognition. No, that's not, she muttered, her voice barely holding together. But it was Daniel Carter, senior partner at Carter and Hayes, a name that had been circling the Wilson household for weeks. Because behind closed doors, away from holiday dinners and polite smiles, Diane had been dealing with a growing problem. Debt, hidden, layered, dangerous, and Carter and Hayes had quietly acquired every piece of it. Every loan, every liability, every vulnerability. Diane had been trying to negotiate her way out, trying to charm, delay, control. And now the man she'd been trying to manage was standing in her doorway, looking past her straight at Elena. You could feel it, right? That moment when someone realizes they're no longer in control and there's nothing they can do to take it back. That was Diane. Elena, she started, but there was no authority left in her voice. Elena finally spoke, calm and measured. I thought it was time we stopped pretending. Marcus frowned. Pretending what? Daniel stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. The soft click echoed louder than it should have. He took in the room, the table, the untouched plates, Maya, then Diane. Is this how you treat family? He asked. Not loudly, not aggressively, but the question landed heavier than anything else that night. Diane straightened, trying to recover. Mr. Carter, this is a private family matter. He didn't even look at her, didn't acknowledge her attempt to regain control. Instead, he turned slightly toward Elena, his expression shifting subtle but unmistakably different. Respect, familiarity, connection, and that's when it became clear this wasn't coincidence. This wasn't timing. This was planned, carefully, precisely. Diane's voice dropped. What did you tell him? Elena held her gaze. Enough. And then Daniel spoke again. One word. A single word that didn't just interrupt the night. It rewrote it. Daughter. Daughter. The word didn't echo, but it didn't need to. It landed heavy, final, unavoidable. For a second, nobody reacted. Not because they didn't hear it, but because their minds refused to process it. Marcus blinked first. What? What did you just say? Diane didn't move. Her face went pale in a way Elena had never seen before. Not anger, not control, something closer to exposure. That's not true, she said quickly. Too quickly. No, absolutely not. But Daniel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Elena, calm, steady, almost asking, "With your permission?" he said quietly. Elena nodded once. That was all he needed. And just like that, the version of the past everyone at that table believed started to unravel. 26 years ago, Daniel began, his voice even, I was in a relationship with Diane Wilson. Brief. Serious enough to matter. It ended abruptly. Diane shook her head, stepping forward. Stop! You don't get to walk in here and rewrite. You told me the child wasn't mine, Daniel continued, cutting through her without raising his voice. Silence. Again. Different this time. Heavier. More dangerous. Marcus looked between them. Mom, what is he talking about? Diane didn't answer because there wasn't an answer that would hold. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm but edged with years of quiet certainty. 7 years ago, I found documents, she said. Old ones. Medical records, dates that didn't match what I'd been told my whole life. She looked at her father, the man who raised her, still sitting at the table, frozen. I asked questions. No one answered. So she went further quietly, legally. A paternity test? Filed, processed, confirmed. Daniel Carter was her biological father. And she knew, Elena added, her eyes returning to Diane, the whole time. Diane's composure cracked completely now. I was protecting this family. From what? Marcus snapped. The truth? But this wasn't just about identity. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. There's more, he said. Because of course there was. There's always more when something's been buried that long. Financial records, altered documents, assets moved under false pretenses, some tied directly to inheritance structures that excluded Elena based on false information. Diane's breathing changed, shallow, uneven, because now it wasn't just personal. It was legal, real. You've been building this, she whispered, staring at Elena. Not a question. A realization. Elena didn't deny it. Yes. Every ignored call, every subtle insult, every calculated dinner invitation, all of it had led here. Not revenge. Exposure. And as the room sat in stunned silence, Daniel took one small step forward and reached for the final piece that would bring everything down. The room didn't explode. It collapsed. Quietly. Completely. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Diane Wilson, he said, pulling a document from the folder and placing it gently on the table, you are being formally notified of pending legal action. No drama. No theatrics. Just facts. Diane's hands trembled as she picked up the paper. Her eyes moved quickly at first, then slower, then stopped altogether. Because now, everything had a name. Logical payoff. For years, Diane had hidden the truth about Elena's biological father, falsifying timelines, withholding records, and manipulating legal documents tied to family assets and inheritance. When Elena discovered inconsistencies 7 years ago, she didn't confront anyone immediately. She investigated, quietly, patiently. The paternity test confirmed Daniel Carter was her biological father. And when Elena reached out to him months ago, he didn't rush in. He verified everything through his firm, uncovering not just the lie about Elena's identity, but financial misconduct tied to that lie. Properties, accounts, and funds had been structured in ways that excluded Elena based on false information. Tonight wasn't spontaneous. It was the moment everything became undeniable. I was protecting us, Diane whispered, her voice hollow now. But there was nothing left to protect. Emotional payoff. Maya looked up at Elena, confused but curious. Mom, is that really my grandpa? Elena exhaled slowly, years of tension leaving her body in a way she didn't expect. Not explosive, not dramatic, just release? Yes, she said softly. Daniel's expression shifted not into pride, not into guilt, but into something steady, present, real. For the first time, Elena wasn't standing alone in that room. Consequence payoff. What followed didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Diane faced formal charges related to financial fraud and document falsification. Assets were frozen, investigations expanded. Marcus cut contact within weeks, unable to reconcile the version of his mother he knew with the reality in front of him. Elena's legal status within the family was corrected, restoring access to what had been deliberately kept from her. The Wilson house, once the center of control, was eventually sold to settle debts. And Daniel, he didn't try to rewrite the past. He showed up consistently, quietly, learning Maya's favorite foods, attending school events, sitting at the table not as a replacement for lost years, but as something new. Final resolution moment. Months later, Elena sat at a smaller table. No grand decorations, no forced smiles, just warmth. Maya laughed beside her, telling a story that didn't need to be perfect. Daniel listened, relaxed, present. No tension, no performance. Elena looked around and realized something simple. That night, she hadn't been thrown out. She had stepped out of a story that was never built for her, and into one she finally understood.
So was this justice or something she had been planning for a long time?